We're back with a weekly best decks video for Marvel Snap. We're going to kick things off showcasing the deck list I've been finding success climbing to Infinite with, and then we're going to dig on into the untapped data and talk about what's been powerful and popular. Let's get to it. We kick off my Jeff's picks with my favorite Agamotto deck I've played so far, featuring Werewolf by Night and Wiccan. This deck list has a tightly packed curve, letting you easily play cards out on turns 1, 2, and 3, while a number of those cards, such as Iron Patriot, Kate Bishop, and Hood, give you plenty of things to be spending your energy on in the late game. One key synergy/interaction to note in this deck list is that Gwenpool's text box has been updated to only impact character cards in your hand, meaning she has a soft synergy with Agamotto, automatically dodging his spells, meaning you're more likely to get stats onto cards you're actually going to be playing out. One thing that stood out in my mind while I was playing this deck list is how Agamotto and Wiccan complement each other nicely. Specifically, Agamotto's 3 energy spell gives you a big burst of energy, which is very Wiccan adjacent, meaning in the games where Wiccan doesn't show up or you fell short of filling out your curve early to activate him, you still have that big burst of energy going into a turn 5 or turn 6 to dance your powerful pup all around the board. As far as higher series cards go here, the really important ones in my mind are Agamotto, Wiccan, Werewolf by Night, and King Atiri. In fact, as far as that last one goes, I would go so far as to say that any Agamotto deck that's not playing one copy of King Atiri is probably misbuilt by at least one card. You're putting Agamotto in your deck and making it less consistent to gain access to his powerful spell library, and King Atiri giving you more consistent access to those potent effects is really key. The other cards could be replaced with things that have similar energy costs. You can keep your curve packed in tightly to enable Wiccan, as well as cards that favor on reveal effects so you can move your werewolf consistently around the board. Next up, we have a deck list I've been calling All in Isan. Isan is such an incredibly powerful effect, letting you drop a created card into play at his location every single turn, and you have to build your deck around it to maximize its potential. This particular deck list is maximized at only Isan, but also our chances of getting him into play. You'll note that our only cards that cost more than 3 energy are Isan and Blink. This means in a game where we haven't drawn Isan yet and we blink a 3 energy card, it is guaranteed to turn into Isan out of our deck. Another piece of technology that helps us maximize Isan's effectiveness in this deck is the inclusion of the copy of Madam Web. Ideally, we play Isan out at her location, and we play him out on turn 4 or 5, thanks to Wave or Luna Snow or Blink accelerating us. And then after Isan drops his first big card into play, we can shuffle that card off to another location with Madam Web, or move Isan himself, depending on where we need stats, to allow his effect triggering multiple times over the course of the game to spread out points around the board. The 2 most important cards in this deck are definitely Isan and Blink. We're building the deck around Isan, and Blink helps us get to him more consistently. After that, Luna Snow and Penny Parker are important for playing these cards ahead of curve so we can get Isan's effect more than once, but you could substitute them for something like Electro or Psylocke that lets you accelerate out cards ahead of curve, even if they're a little bit less ideal under certain situations. Madam Web, while being a cheeky piece of technology, could be substituted for something like Doctor Strange or even Ghost Spider that lets you reposition Isan later in the game after you get your first trigger with him. Any other cards, you just want to focus on keeping your curve low so they don't get in the way of your blink, and ideally generating creative cards for Isan to dump into play. My last Jeff's pick that I've actually done the most climbing with through a majority of the 90s, I've been referring to as Victoria Bounce. It's kind of just an amalgamation of cards that I love playing in Marvel Snap personally. We've got a wide spread of disruptive and utility 1 energy cards that Falcon can let us use more than one time. We have Black Swan to make all these 1-drops completely free on the last turn of the game, so Hitmonkey can get absolutely massive. And then we fill in the remaining slots not with more bounce effects, but instead a small created card package featuring Iron Patriot, Victoria Hand, and Frigga, as well as Kate Bishop, who kind of ties the 2 packages together. Kate's arrows get bonuses from Victoria Hand, and there are also additional 1 energy cards that Falcon can bounce, and Black Swan makes free to make your Hitmonkey absolutely massive. Unfortunately, this deck list does not really have clean replacements for a lot of its cards. Victoria Hand, Frigga, and Black Swan, and Kate are all pretty unique in the roles that they fill. Iron Patriot's probably the only one you could swap something else in for, with any other generically good 1 or 2 energy card probably being fairly serviceable there. Moving along to some of the top performing decks per untap metrics in our new season, we kick things off with this Kitty Pryde, Agamotto, Good Stuff, Control Tech cards amalgamation. I really love the range of quality proactive cards that this deck can play out. Gorgon in particular seems pretty well positioned at disrupting opposing Agamotto spells, as well as all the Dirty Arishem players that are running around making your life miserable with randomly generated cards. I like the inclusion of Agamotto inside a Kitty Pryde Hope Summer package as well, because all of those spells banishing themselves allow you to get extra energy generated with Hope without taking up dedicated spots in her lane, meaning you maximize the effect that she's generating for you without locking yourself into how many cards are there. This deck list also has a really clean mix of proactive numbers on the board, as well as reactive things with Shang-Chi and Enchantress, so I would wager you can be competitive against basically anything, which is nice, considering you don't want to be someone who's losing matches at the loading screen. Unfortunately, this deck list isn't remotely budget friendly. The 2 energy cards don't really have clean replacements, as they're all unique, powerful effects that happen to be at higher series. Next up, we have an ongoing Spectrum variation that has an impressive way to spread stats out across the board in a way that's difficult for your opponents to predict. Your final turn of the game could be you slamming down an Iron Man and Mystique in 2 different lanes thanks to Ravona's energy acceleration, or it could just be you deploying a copy of Spectrum, adding 7 stats in one location and +2s across the board everywhere else. I really love the inclusion of Mr. Fantastic in here as a way to get even more stats into those hard to reach places in a way that's difficult for your opponent to account for. This deck list overall is definitely pretty budget friendly. If you're missing any of the higher series cards like Sam Wilson or Moonstone or Anti-Venom, you can easily replace them with other reasonable ongoing cards at similar energy costs. That last part's important though, because you want to make sure you're playing out cards every turn over the course of the game, so that your Spectrum has lots of things to buff up at the end when you slam her down. Another variation of ongoing was putting up powerful stats on Untapped as well, this one featuring higher series cards Doom 2099 as well as Iron Lad. This deck list essentially trades some of the utility cards like Luke Cage and others that the typical build plays for a wider range of output at the top end of its curve to leave your opponent guessing as to how exactly you're going to play out that big turn 6. The threat of both Doctor Doom and Spectrum makes it difficult for your opponent to play around everything you could be doing, letting you steal a lot of cubes where they play around one thing and you end up dropping the other to great effect. Our next top performer on the Untapped metrics is a Dakin discard variation that I personally found a ton of success with in Post-Infinite last season. This deck list just has a massive numbers output range, regularly dropping 50 plus points of power in 2 different lanes, thanks to Dakin and his shards being doubled up by things like Frigga and Moon Girl, while Bullseye blows them all out of your hand, simultaneously shrinking your opponent's board down. While looking over the numbers, there's a lot of variations on some of the details in this deck, but I was very happy to see that the innovation of playing Moon Girl that I was excited to try last season actually ends up being the top performing iteration we currently have in the pre-infinite ladder. This deck list unfortunately does not have clean substitutions for the higher series cards it wants to play. Bullseye, Dakin, Frigga, Scorn, and even Meek are all unique in the effect that they bring to the table, and this deck list is going to be lacking a good bit of power, meaning you should likely play something else if they're missing from your collection. Our next top performer is a Bast Agent Venom deck. That's one of my favorite types of decks to play in Marvel Snap. It has a really low to the ground curve, meaning your later turns often involve figuring out how to sequence out more than one cheap card at different locations to greatest effect. Cards like Havoc and Thena also present really interesting sequencing decisions on how to min-max not only the stats of the cards that you're playing out that turn, but also the total points that you're getting on the board in the long run. This deck list is pretty budget friendly in my experience, with the only higher series cards that are key to it being Agent Venom as well as Thena, because they add a lot of important stats to the board for you. Other things like US Agent, Cassandra Nova, Sage, and Red Guardian can be substituted out for other utility or tech cards, so long as you're keeping in mind that you want to keep the base power on your cards as low as possible to maximize the bonuses that you're going to be getting from Bast and Agent Venom. It's also worth a call out that while this particular deck list is posting good stats on the ladder as people are climbing back to Infinite, it's also an excellent choice for playing in Sanctum Showdown as well because its curve is so low to the ground. Our next top performer is a Hazmat Ajax deck playing a bunch of toys from last week, specifically Diamondback and Laufey as new card additions. Honestly, I'm always a little bit surprised whenever I see this archetype posting consistently strong numbers, especially a build like this that's only playing Red Guardian as a way to interact with opposing copies of Luke Cage. As a tip, when you're playing against this deck, make sure you're putting your Luke into a path where it has something lower power next to it to dodge this counterplay, or that you're saving your Luke Cage out to play on the 6th turn of the game, because this deck really goes limp when its detrimental effects are completely shut off. This deck list is not remotely budget friendly if you're looking to make substitutions. A lot of its higher series cards are pretty specific in the effect that they bring, and there aren't really a lot of choices for things that afflict your opponents with less stats. In a somewhat ironic twist of fate, as I'm making my way back into Marvel Snap in a big way, so is Hela, one of my least favorite cards. They nerfed Scar to make his namesake deck less powerful, and in doing so, they made him one of the few 7 energy cards in the game, which means Hela's rework that reanimates a card of each different cost got a pretty sizable upgrade, because you've been an Infidot, a Scar, and a Death, and that's a lot of points of power in addition to Hela's 9 stats that she still provides herself. One saving grace is that while this deck is the most popular pre and post Infinite by their metrics, its actual performance is markedly worse than basically every other deck that I've covered in this video. So hopefully people will get bored of her and start settling on things that are both more interesting and winning more frequently in the long term. Finally, I wanted to close things out with a weekend missions deck optimizer for folks that are interested in such things. It's playing both our season pass card and Isan, so you can knock out those win with Agamotto and Isan missions all at the same time. We got a really closely packed curve at the bottom end, so that way you can enable Wiccan consistently, so you can accelerate up into Agamotto spells as well as Isan ahead of curve. Something particularly close to this actually had pretty good stats on the untapped tracker, but noteworthy that the more popular variation was both not playing King Atiri and it was only playing 3 1-drops, which is mathematically very bad when you're trying to play Wiccan, so I cleaned up a little bit of the details before sharing it here with you all. Much like riding a bike, climbing back to Infinite and rounding up sweet deck lists here for you all is something that's coming right on back to me. I'm looking forward to doing it again in the future. I'm also looking forward to hearing your comments down below about which deck lists you're unable to play because you simply don't have all of the Series 4 and 5 cards. Economy rework when, second dinner. At any rate, if you enjoyed the roundup and you're excited to see the back, make sure you smash the like button. If you're someone that happens to be new here and you enjoy the vibe of what's going on, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can come back again for excellent Marvel Snap content like this. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through the end, and I hope your weekend missions and weekend in general are off to a fantastical start.